Hi everyone, I am Laura Capel-Abra, founder of workplace wellbeing organisation Stress Matters. We are built on 3 pillars: insights, accountability and support, and our vision is all focused around creating well workforces. We encourage businesses to develop insights into how their team and their business are actually coping with mental health and wellbeing through our insights programs. We use a coaching backbone to everything we do for wellbeing to ensure actual progress happens, and we keep our clients accountable to make sure change happens in the workforce. And support-wise, we offer different types of support for each business, completely varying dependent on what that business needs. Welcome to the second part of our mental health series in conjunction with London and Partners. Today we are going to be looking at the fact that we are returning to workforces. Well, some of us are anyway. Depending what industry you work in, some of you have not been able to work for the last 6 months because of our offices and our workplaces being shut down. Many of us, however, have been able to work remotely, and so depending on the twists and turns of the business and whether or not we've been put on furlough, we may have continued working, albeit remotely, in our jobs. We're going to be looking at the do's, the don'ts, and looking at some of the questions that haven't been answered. So we'll start off with some of those do's. So we're breaking this down for you into 5 really clear do's. Do be overly cautious when it comes to people's mental health and well-being. Yes, it might feel like we're wrapping people up in cotton wool, but if we have a culture where people feel comfortable to tell us how we're doing, hopefully by us being cautious, they're actually going to come back to us and say, I'm doing okay, I don't need any more support, thank you. And it's far better in this kind of situation to edge on caution than it is to be a little bit flippant about people's mental health. So please be cautious about people's health. Do listen non-judgmentally. It's really easy to sit there and nod our head and say aha, aha when people are talking to us. But how much are you actually listening when you're talking to people you work with, and other people for that matter as well? So do ensure that you're listening non-judgmentally. We might have an idea about how someone's experience has been over the last 6 months. Maybe they've been on furlough whilst you've been working. So you might be listening to somebody saying actually it's been really tough for them, and you might be sitting there with judgment thinking, well, hang on a minute, at least you weren't working, I was working the whole time. What we're doing then is putting our judgments onto other people. So try and listen non-judgmentally to others and listen to what they actually are trying to tell us. Do train your line managers. We say this quite a lot, and it's something that seems to get forgotten regularly. Line managers quite often get promoted into roles because they are very good at their job. But the problem is when people get promoted into a line manager role, they're actually getting given a different job. And very regularly, companies don't give line managers the training they need to be able to do that new job appropriately. So think about the fact that now, line managers, we've not only been battling with the fact over the last 6 months of if we are working remotely or working with disparate and changing teams, we're now going to be putting these line managers into another situation where actually they've got to be bringing those team members back together. We've talked about motivation before, but also they're going to have more of a pastoral care type role. So we need to make sure that our line managers have the training that they need to be able to offer the support to somebody and spot signs and symptoms of potential mental ill health. So look at training those line managers. By a day's training course in mental health for line managers, you might actually be stopping somebody's stress develop into a mental health illness. Also, we know the impact that mental health illnesses and taking time out of work can have on the whole workforce. So it's really important that your line managers are trained to spot the signs and symptoms of poor mental ill health, understand how to listen non-judgmentally, but also understand how to have open and honest conversations whilst building a culture that is more positive around well-being. Do review your existing policies and procedures as well. I know you've probably all been doing it in terms of physical workplace returns and thinking actually, how do we implement social distancing? How do we make sure we have enough hand washing stations? Can we put signage up to tell people to wear masks? All of those things are clearly vitally important. However, it's also really important that you review your policies and procedures when it comes to mental health. Think about the risk assessment that you have for your business. There should be a section in that which is terms of welfare or stress management. We need to look at the risk assessment. We need to understand that so we can make positive changes. That's why we talk about insights. When you understand the insights, you understand the problem it is you're trying to solve. If we don't understand what the problems potentially are, we've got no way of putting a solution in place that will help individuals. So make sure you review those policies and procedures, considering not only just the physical well-being of your team, of your clients, of your delegates, your visitors, but also thinking about that mental safety of all of those different stakeholders as well. And do make well-being a strategic priority. We are speaking to a lot of people at the moment that are quickly jumping on the fact that they probably should do something about their team's mental health and well-being. And don't worry, that's still a very important thing to be doing. But we know that actually, if you have strategic well-being programs in place that are made a strategic priority, actually the return on investment for those is much more around the 11-to-1 mark than the 2 to 5-to-1 of lower impact interventions. So it's really important that you see this as a wider program, not just we're all coming back into the workforce, we need to do something to help people. Think about how this can play through your whole business. If you're taking mental safety, you're putting that hat on your head and saying, if I look at everything that's going on in our business with regards to mental safety, are we making this a priority or not? So moving on to the do nots then. So one of the biggest do nots is do not make assumptions. It's really easy for us to assume certain things will be okay, certain things will not be okay. People might see things in a certain way, or we might think they're going to see things in an entirely different way. We are going to be making assumptions. We don't know what they're actually thinking and what the situation actually is, so do not make assumptions. Double check everything you go through at the moment. When it comes to mental safety, we can't assume we understand people's mental health and well-being unless we're having those conversations with them. So do not make assumptions. Do not forget perceptions. The perception your team will have of you as an individual, as a leader, as a manager, or an integral part of that team. You need to think about how you are being perceived by other people. So do not forget those perceptions. If you want other people to act in a certain way, then do that. If you want them to follow certain social distancing policies, if you want them to think about workplace wellbeing culture in terms of maybe the hours that are being worked, then make sure you follow that yourself. Lead by example. So do not forget the fact that actually people will be impacted by the way you're acting as well. Do not forget your voice. Whatever position you are in the company, we all have a voice. Now, some cultures, some companies, that voice might be a little bit louder. Some, it might be a little bit quieter, but we all have a voice. And the more people that join together, that bigger that voice is as well. So think about how you talk about things internally and don't feel like you can't stand up to something if you're not comfortable with it. If you don't feel comfortable returning to that workforce and you don't think a thorough enough risk assessment has been done, you feel too anxious to go on public transport, whatever it is, don't forget you have a voice. Speak up. It is far better to have that conversation. It might be a slightly awkward conversation. Far better to have that conversation than to let anxiety build up and cause a state of discomfort. World Suicide Prevention Day is coming up on September the 10th. There's a really good opportunity to think about having our voice, sharing our voice. So do not forget we all have a voice. Do not go back to how things were. We are in a different world. I'm going to refrain from using the phrase that everybody is using, but we're not going back to the same world anymore. So actually, we need to think about what it is going forward. So don't try to retrofit everything back into how things were done previously. A bit like we said with the do's, think about reviewing your policies and procedures and actually use this as an opportunity to thrive, not just survive. So do not actively return back to normal. Try and think about how we can do things better. And don't forget we're all human. We're all going to have good days. We're all going to have bad days. Just because we're listening to somebody telling us they're having a really rough day doesn't mean we suddenly need to be signposting them into mental health support. They could just be having a rough day. We need to be conscious that we're all humans and what we do impacts other people. So when we think about returning to the workforce, it's going to be okay to be a little bit anxious. It's okay to feel a little bit uncomfortable. And it's okay to not quite know how to act in certain situations. We're all going through this together. So we do not need to make the assumption that somebody else knows what needs to happen right now. So that was some do's and don'ts for you. Hopefully that gives you a little bit of an idea of some of the things you could be considering in terms of the way you talk to people, the way we review procedures and policies. We have a guide for workplaces, so if you'd like to know a little bit more information about how you can make your workplace and your venue or event, whatever it is, wellbeing, mental health safe, then let us know and we can provide that information to you. Well, one of the big questions that we have still is, when do you have to go back to the workplace? So as I said, lots of companies are able to work remotely, and lots of companies have said, actually, we're going to do that. And there's an expectation of around 30% of companies reducing office space going forward. But not all roles are able to be done to work from home. So actually thinking about those roles that have to be done in a live environment, what is the expectation on individuals and on employees to go back to work if they don't feel safe? It's a big question. We don't really know the answer. Now, we know that businesses have a duty of care. Businesses have to make an environment safe for people to go into. So if you don't feel that you're in a safe environment to go back into a workplace, you are in your right to tell your employer that and say you don't feel safe. And at that point, have a conversation about the risk assessment they have done and the procedures and policies they have put in place to make you feel safe. It might be, for example, that you don't feel comfortable going on public transport yet. So actually, can you speak to your employer about ensuring there's maybe available car parking space so you don't have to get public transport if you do have access to a car? Have that conversation with your employer to look at ways around the solution to make it a situation that you are comfortable with, because we want people to go back to the workplace. And one of the big questions we have is, we don't know what the impact all of the last 6 months is going to have on people's mental health and well-being. It's a huge big question mark. I think we can probably all be honest individually and say it's had a bit of a toll on all of us. But actually the collective impact of that, we can look at the stats in terms of redundancies, for example, and the impact on GDP, but it's going to be a long time before we really understand the actual impact. We do know from some data that it's anticipated depression has doubled during COVID for adults. It's also had an impact on anxiety in our school children as well. This is a big impact, and I really think we're probably underestimating the impact. And as I said, we're probably not going to know this for months and months and months. So whilst it's a big question, what we can do right now as people that like to take action is make sure we try and minimise that impact. Make sure we return to work in an environment that is safe for people, that we put people's mental health and well-being as a strategic priority, and we don't just do this as a tick box exercise. People are going to need a lot of support over the coming months. And if you're in a business where people are offering support, you're going to have a far more loyal, more motivated and more profitable team in front of you. If you need any support in terms of looking at your workplace wellbeing strategy, understanding areas that you guys could be improving on, just want to talk to us about your mental health and wellbeing, you might want to consider training some of your line managers in mental health first aid. Talk to us, give us a ring, drop us an email, connect with us on social media. We'd be happy to help. We work with lots and lots of creative businesses and professional services, lots of venues, to try and help them understand how they can improve the workplace wellbeing of their teams. Stay safe, everybody, and until the next video, look after yourself and your team.